We go through the forum with, as you know, a large number of very distinguished panelists talking in panel form about issues that are critically important. What we're going to do now over the course of the next 45 minutes or so is a little bit of a variation. We're calling this the Great Debate, and it's an opportunity to spring open arguments on all sides of the spectrum, in this case about minerals-led development. Is that a thing? Is it a myth? Is it a reality? And we have 6 excellent speakers who are going to address those issues and then debate among themselves as to whether they're right or whether they're wrong. Now, for this to work, it's going to need a sense of direction and development. So for those of you who are in the room already, I'm going to ask you in a moment, have a little think. Do you believe that minerals-led development is a myth, or is it a reality? And when we talk about development, it could be for resource-rich countries, developing countries, with minerals, but perhaps without infrastructure, perhaps without governance. It could be the development of local communities, of women, of indigenous communities as well. It could be the development of a green transition. How developmental is it? Does the minerals and mining sector actually serve that purpose? So I'm going to take the middle pew here and call on my speakers to come and join me up here. And I will explain how this is going to work once I've brought them onto the stage. So ladies and gentlemen, would you give a warm welcome, please, to our 6 debaters. Moath Arawi, the CEO of Argas, that's the Arabian Geophysical and Surveying Company. Mark Bristow, who is President and CEO of Barrick Gold. Mark Cutifani, who is the Chair of Vale Base Metals. Florence Drummond, Executive Director of the Development Partner Institute. John Morrison, the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business. And Marcelo Paiva, who's the co-chair and director of Sigma Lithium. Marcelo, thank you for joining us. Let's just give our debaters a warm welcome, please, as we kick off this, thank you very much indeed, kick off this debate. I should point out that Flo was very keen to walk on to the theme tune from Rocky, because a few punches might be thrown. We're looking for some cut and thrust in the course of this debate. But I did say I wanted a show of hands to start us off. So the title is very, very simple. Minerals-led development, myth or reality? So those of you here, please, if you think essentially it's myth, could you raise your hands? Okay.
There's one at the back.
One at the back. And reality? Yeah, we've got a few more from reality. So, okay, that sets the scene. And we have an opportunity to consolidate that view, or indeed to turn a corner on it. And I'm going to ask each of our debaters to give us a 2-minute pitch on why they think it is the way they think it. So listen into the pitches, and then I'd like to say the gloves are off, but then the debate can begin. So Mark Cutifani, I'm going to turn to you first, Mark. The topic is a very straightforward one on the page, not quite so in reality. Where do you stand?
Thanks, David, and thank you to the organisers for the opportunity, and to my colleagues here on the stage this afternoon. I just hope we don't get picked on too much. I think from my point of view, the conversation around minerals is everything that we have and everything that we are comes from minerals. The ancient Greeks, 2,500 years ago, identified the nature of things in 4 words: air, water, fire, energy, earth, minerals. And to bring that thinking in today's context, we heard yesterday a conversation around oil and gas being the key driver of industrialisation over the last 50 years. And then the conversation was minerals would be the key driver in the next 50 years. And I would argue that perspective and say that in actual fact, minerals were key to extracting the value from oil and gas in the last 50 years, because we used minerals to find the oil, we used minerals and products of minerals to refine, distribute, transport, use and utilise. So minerals have been key to oil and gas for the last 50 years. In the next 50 years, we're going to need minerals to extract the value from other energy sources that actually makes the world work. So from my perspective, minerals support everything, including in particular the sustainability of the globe and our way of life. And so in our conversations, the question is, how much can we support minerals development? How do we do it the right way to make sure that everybody benefits, both in terms of the products and the things we use, and in terms of the way we do our work, so that we're not creating winners and losers. We know we've got more work to do, but we do represent the most important industry on the face of the planet, in our view.
Right, it's a reality. That's the bottom line of that, and a very strong message. Thank you. 2 minutes to almost to the second as well, which is appreciated. So let's turn over to Moath Al-Rawi now. Moath, CEO on the end there, sorry, of Argas, of the Arabian Geophysical and Surveying Company. You have 2 minutes for your pitch.
So I would say where. It is reality in certain markets, and it is a pure myth in certain markets. But the challenges will always going to be, regardless of which market we are. And I would say it, if you are into the development game, if you are in the game, you need to accept to get dirt on your shirt. And the reality is that it will challenge the community. It will bring environmental concerns. It will disturb, and that's the nature of development. I'm with the development, but I'm with the management of such conditions. But to think that any industry or any development will take place without those compromises, then that would be less practical. There are many examples around the world of countries and societies that manage to get into this process. And I would say the key solution is what we need to debate here, not whether it is there or not. It will be there. And the solution resides in the type of the investments, the type of the investor, which is, in my opinion, number one, who are championing this, and with the regulation and the policy making, which is the other component. But in general, if you want to play, you need to understand there are compromises, and it will come at a cost.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that perspective. So let me turn over to the, and I should point out, this is not split one side and the other in terms of myth and reality. As you can see, there are going to be some lines along the spectrum. But Florence, let me turn to you, your perspective.
Yes, so I am here on the myths team, so that's who I'm representing, and thank you, my dear colleagues, who did have some very good arguable points for the reality. And I think firstly, I think this may be where the gloves come off, Dave, is it by
Early
choice?
start. Is
it by choice that these stakeholders have given consent to have dirt on their shirt? So I think that's definitely one point. But for the other points I'd like to raise as well, I think there's 3 key points that I'd like to focus on with this debate. If it were reality, why are we still challenged with sustainable agreement making for all stakeholders? So really think about what that speaks to in terms of complex stakeholder dynamics, insufficient collaborative frameworks, and then also as on my third point on that was mismatched priorities and capacity gaps. Secondly, if we think of if it were a reality, why does it continue to be risks for investment in mining? We've heard that all throughout today and yesterday, how investors are still worried about their investments, long-term investments in mining. And then thirdly, it would be if it was still a reality, why do we face a talent shortage for the future skills needed for industry as well? That again is another point that has been raised throughout this conference, not only this conference, but many conferences, as one of the leading challenges for industry as well. And so, David, I might cut my introduction short, if I may, and leave the rest of my responses.
Okay, yeah, well, there will be time for that, certainly. Thank you, Flo. Thanks very much indeed. So, John, you've had a chance to hear some of the arguments on both sides of the fence now. You are CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business. Minerals-led development, myth or reality?
Now, you're expecting me to say myth, aren't you? So I will say myth, but, right? Over the past 25 years, it's been a reality for some, but a myth for others. Clearly economic benefits, but we know that human development hasn't correlated necessarily with extraction. And for some, because of corruption, internal conflict, repression of minorities, etc., they haven't known the benefits in development terms or human rights terms. However, we have over the past 25 years made some good progress on issues of governance, transparency, and human security. And so when I look forward to the next 25 years, will it be a myth or will it be reality? The choice is with you in the audience. You could make it reality if we double down and keep hold of the progress we're starting to make. But we have risks. Rapid spikes in demand for transition minerals. We've heard a lot about that today and yesterday. The green imperative itself driving that. The lack of transformation in global value chains. Yesterday's ministerial, a lot of global south governments want to move downstream. They want to have a higher value proposition. But will tariffs and trade wars allow for that? So I think there are, and then CBAM and other well-intentioned mechanisms are also potentially other forms of tariff that will enter into this. So finally, moving forward, read the UN Secretary General's report on critical energy. I think some people on this stage were part of that. Let's move more quickly on vertical and horizontal integration of standards and governance. And let's make sure all the players are involved in that. Let's have better alignment, better incentives. Traceability, yes, but let's preserve some of the benefits of the mass balance approaches. Accountability, and most importantly, I'll finish on this, the inclusion of the people who are going to be impacted most over the transition ahead, the most vulnerable people. I mean indigenous peoples, I mean artisanal miners, etc. They need to be part of these discussions and they need to benefit from the transition ahead. Thank you.
John, thank you very much indeed for that. I want to turn now to our other Mark on the panel, Mark Bristow, President and CEO of Barrick Gold. Mark?
So I'm very much on the reality side, but there's lots of ways to look at reality, and I think we've just seen some of the examples of the prejudice around how good mining is. And if you look at mining and its impact, we wouldn't be able to feed the world without mining. We would have cities that are very much larger footprints than they are today. And I think the reality is that the developed world excludes the developing world. And so you heard it yesterday on the Ministers' Roundtable. Those are mostly from the Global South yesterday. And everyone was working out how much they could get in financial benefits from their mineral endowments. No one said that they would like to participate in industrializing and uplifting their economies using their own endowments. And the first world, or the developed world, sits there and doesn't want to get their hands dirty, but they do want the minerals from somewhere else. And I think that is what we have, one of the things that really drove the Future Mineral Forum's start was an honest conversation. And just sharing is not, I will pay you so I can take all your minerals and leave you impoverished. Maybe richer, but impoverished. And we know that you can put batteries in all the cars in California. You're not going to save the planet. But if you industrialize the world and uplift those poor people out of poverty, that will create a future. You bring down fertility, you have a better quality of life. People are contribute because they're not just working to survive.
Got to stop you there. Thank you very much indeed. A very strong message which hints at myth, I have to say, in terms of some of the directions you're going in. We'll come back to that as well. So that brings us to Marcelo. Marcelo, thank you very much indeed. You've listened intently, no doubt, to 5 of the pitches. What is your view?
Okay, so firstly, I'd like to thank you, the forum, for the kind invitation to participate in this panel. It's a real honor. So to start with, development is not a myth, and it can be clearly demonstrated by prosperity brought to regions that otherwise would be condemned to poverty, all thanks to the mining sector. In my view, the sector is very powerful in lifting people out of poverty, just like oil and gas. Having said that, it must be done right. The sector must adhere to strict safety protocols, labor rights, environmental regulations, with a very strong focus on sharing prosperity amongst local communities. And that's a very important point from my point of view. The economic development can be substantial in the critical material space where I am, especially if and where there is like integration with mining and industrial processing, where you have increased economies of scale and industrial competitiveness. I'd like to highlight a case in point into what's happening in one of the poorest regions in Brazil, fueled by the lithium industry. In a region where we have around 60,000 people living on less than $20 a month, the economic impact has been profound. And the numbers speak for themselves, right? We've had 1,500 new direct jobs, 13,000 new indirect jobs, 26,000 new employment opportunities thanks to microcredit and immigration programs. And the sector has been a key driver to the 6.3% GDP growth of the state, while municipalities' revenues have more than doubled since the beginning of the operation.
Okay, that's a pretty clear thumbs up in terms of reality, I think you point out there. That's the pitch from the 6 of you. I'm tempted, Flo, to let you get straight stuck into Moath, actually, because you made a very interesting point about his reference, which I think is a very honest one. You get dirt on your shirt. That's the nature of this sector, this industry, and that extends to CO2 emissions, to fumes, to environmental treatment for local communities, what they have to live with, whether that's in a developing country or not, in fact. So perhaps that's where you would like to throw your first punch.
Yeah, certainly. And I think in an extension to that as well, the element of consent, what does that look like? And I know even with Mark Udufani as well, extending that, and also Mark Bristow, speaking about how long we've been in development for, yet we still haven't gotten it right. So I think that's the point I'm really trying to pin here, is that it's fantastic to aspire to. These reality aspirations are wonderful, and certainly some great case in points, but I think if we've done it for so long, why haven't we gotten it right yet?
Aspirations, you see, it's aspirations, it's not reality.
Look, I think Florence makes a strong point regarding the broad question, but I would say there are many fantastic examples of where mining companies have connected with local communities, with the national government, in developing mines and minerals for the country's good, for local communities. The question is, how do we make sure that model becomes a model for all mining operations? And we do have to remember there are illegal mining activities, artisanal mining activities, there are many companies doing really good work, and there are some players who aren't doing very good work. So the question is, and I don't think we argue this, is we know minerals are absolutely critical for everybody in terms of survival of the planet. The question is, how can we do it better? How can we work together? And how can we partner in developments that really do deliver and uplift communities on a broader scale? Because we've heard that argument both sides.
Still work to do, you say. Well, let me bring Mark in here. Talk about work to do. You've got an arrest warrant hanging over you in Mali. You've had to close down the 2 mines for the time being because of an inability to operate in an area which is obviously extremely volatile at the moment. That's hardly development.
Well, I think the point there, I think, that's a very unique situation in that, but there's a lesson out of that, and that is about communication and that's, and proper transformation.
But Mark, sorry to interrupt you. It wouldn't be the first time. You say it's a unique situation. It's not the first time that either a government or a military government has decided to take over or to impose or to threaten to take over a mine.
Yes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a reality component. And again, when I listen, it's easy when we've got everything to say we need to give this away. We need to give a job here, an opportunity here, but what we need is to uplift and industrialize the world. And, there's a good example here in this country. If you industrialize the world, you change it for the better. It's not about pollution and smoke and dirt. It's about a better life, because industrialized economies are better. And to do that, you need mining. And so mining is the absolute foundation of everything we do. We all walk around. The madam's got earrings, cell phones. We've all used mining, but we deny it. And what we've got to do is embrace it, and we've got to embrace the world's population and not be exploitative. We've got to be inclusive.
Okay, thank you. And we'll come back to that, because you did also say the developed world excludes the developing world, which is a point to come back to. John.
I find myself in violent agreement with the Marx, but the development is a right. The global South has pushed for decades for development to be seen as a human right. Everybody should have the right to development. That means everybody should have the right to industrialize in a carbon sensible way. The implication there is everyone has the right to move downstream and not just remain upstream, right? We've got to move beyond an industry of extraction. Replacing high carbon extraction with green extraction is not progress in developmental ways. My worry is that the developed world will not allow the South to move downstream, because when they start producing products that compete with American jobs, etc., we get into tariffs, we get into trade wars, etc. So we are denying much of what's being talked about in this panel, and I do agree the government sometimes talk in both ways, as if these two realities could sit together. But yeah, development, human rights people, we're not against development. Development is a human right. It is the right of every person to advance their economies, their livelihoods, the chances of their children. That's fundamental to human dignity. So let's not think that somehow people like me are trying to put a constraint or a straitjacket on where we go the next 30 years. If we don't have a rules-based approach, though, it's chaos, and we won't have a planet to live on. So I don't think we really have a choice in terms of how we industrialize.
Okay, who wants to answer John's fears there? Is there anyone who will pick up on that? I mean, look, yeah, go ahead. I mean, we've got a new man in the White House coming any day now. Tariffs is his favorite word.
So the point of people having the right to development, I think, is very consistent with Mark's argument. And as we know, we've discussed the same points. We agree. We are in a conversation around mining reality and its contribution to society, and there's no debate, I don't think, on that point. The question of government policy and how government policy supports development that is inclusive is, I think, the real debate. And I'm not one for tariffs. I believe there should be free trade so that we, if you like, exploit comparative advantage for the benefit of all. They're nice words. How do you make it work is the key. But again, if you look at in that ministerial meeting yesterday, everybody wants everything today.
All at
and
once.
that's not how things work.
Yeah.
How do you invest in the country? And the experience is invest in natural resources, invest in primary infrastructure, invest in people, build mining operations, but jumping down to a refinery that costs twice as much as the mine, has 1/10 of the margin, can't be justified by mining companies. So you don't get development.
You disagree with the other
So
market.
how do you put those strategies
You disagree with
together?
each other then, in effect. Which is interesting for me to observe that. Because
So your
Mark talked
positions
about
are-
industrialization.
Don't tell us what we do and don't do.
That's a debate for you. That's a debate for you.
You know, my point is, I think very rarely, if you look at where we are in this forum, no one talks about investability. Everyone talks about benefits. Benefits from all the actions we do. Benefits from mining, benefits from greenhouse gas reductions, all that sort of thing. Critical minerals. What is a critical mineral? Critical mineral is any mineral metal that's got a market. But no one talks about how you get that value. And that means investability. And the developed economies are, and us privileged people are denying the majority of the people on this planet an opportunity to benefit. And we don't know how to make emerging markets investable because we all think every emerging market is bad and it's going to steal from you and you're not going to get your money back because we don't embrace it. And if we run around penalizing people with tariffs, you're never going to have a future for our children and their children's children.
I want to throw that to Marcelo. You're a financier.
Yes.
You talk about investability. You've given an example of that. How much of that do you accept and how much would you refute?
Listen, I'll give you our example, right? So we acquired the assets in January 2016. Since day one, we were extremely worried on the environmental front and social front. And there's something that I think there's not enough discussion about, is that there is a cost when it comes to sustainability in a world that doesn't pay green premium. However, I would say that when you look into our company, the first outside investor shareholders that we had in our company, they are currently making 50 times on their initial investment. And the company is currently net zero carbon and has a substantial social impact. So what is my conclusions there? That you need to run an operation that is low cost. If you run an operation that is low cost in a jurisdiction that is low cost, and especially, on this particular point, I'm very privileged that we operate in Brazil. In Brazil, we have plenty of renewable energy. You can match, and you can have it all. But if your operation is not low cost, and then what concerns me is when you're living an environment of low prices, that you may have players out there that may look for shortcuts, and that's not acceptable.
But if you want to lead on development, you're operating within jurisdictions that are sometimes quite challenging, unclear, murky even, where the royalties are going, where the taxes are going, and that is impinging on development, isn't it? That is holding back the development that you're trying to create.
Yeah.
And that is the mineral sector.
Yeah,
in a large way.
that's where I think the word traceability comes. Traceability is essential.
Is it a reality? It's essential. Is it a reality? It's a question for anyone.
I think currently it's opaque, especially in the critical mineral space. It's happening a lot in my sector in lithium, as it used to happen in cobalt, but it's happening right now.
Thank you very much indeed. Flo, I want to come back to one or two of the questions you raised early on, and one of them revolved effectively around stakeholders, or one might say not stakeholders, they have a stake, but they're not being included in that discussion in the development world. How, from what you've heard here, I mean, there's a drive to do something about that, but you're not seeing that drive?
I think there's, again, aspirations to be a reality. But what I have noticed here today is the need for language evolution. I think what we've spoken about there in terms of the compartmentalizing of who the stakeholders are, and this also speaks to your point as well about being given the permission to develop as well. So I think when you think about power dynamics traditionally, that's still coming through as well. So if we're then to include all stakeholders, and tribal people, indigenous peoples, women, other people who are in these mining jurisdictions, the question I would put back to the reality team, whose responsibility is it to create awareness and education around this power dynamic as well in terms of investment? You spoke about investment, you spoke about bringing people out of poverty. Whose responsibility is to create that awareness and is a part of the investment strategy as well?
Let me put that to you, Marth. Whose responsibility? You talked about you must accept there'll be compromises. So who has that responsibility?
So what I like about this is I think everybody is saying the same thing in a different way. It's not black and white. It's 50 shades of a gray. And the bottom line is mining is one of the oldest industries in the world. And there was a saying, if you cannot grow it, then mine it. So do we like this fancy construction? Do we like those fancy screens behind us? We enjoy our phones and all that? Absolutely. And I think that should be to everybody. The demand on those minerals is humongous in the next years, especially with the transition of energy. We have heard Prince Abdulaziz earlier saying an inspiring statement that energy needs mining and mining needs energy. And yes, absolutely, we cannot take the objectives of decarbonization and diversification of energy without those critical minerals and many other minerals, even the ones that today we do not call critical, they are critical to the civilization and the future of the earth. Now, would it come with challenges and cost? Yes, like anything else, development cost. And we need to be responsible as a society. There are no two sides. Everybody is responsible, and we need to understand the implications, and they do vary from one environment to another, and we need to be managing those expenses that may impact our environment, may impact our societies, it may impact our people. And I think the right debate is how we can achieve this. And I can tell you taxes is not the way. I'm a smoker, but they say smoking is bad. And what happened with the smoking industry is that rather than we reduce the cost of medical expenses, we impose taxes on cigarettes. There are two ways to do it. And the same is happening to the energy prices around. But it's not the answer. The answer is how we can lower that cost and accelerate that process to serve the civilization. Mining is not smoking. Right. Mining is critical. It provides the healthcare that we need. It provides the education that we need. It provides the jobs. Today we hire...
But does it matter, sorry to interrupt, does it matter at what pace that development takes place to you? I mean, you said, look, it'll come, it might be slow. I mean, it's not acceptable for many people. Patience is running out in terms of a sense that actually this is a developmental opportunity.
The more controls imposed at the exploration period, the painful is going to be for everybody. In my opinion, if we would like to accelerate that process, there must be an acceleration of the exploration phase and more control during the development and production. The challenge is that the investors in our industry follow the commodity price. And they invest when prices are high trying to recover their capital of exploration at those times. And this is why we go into cyclic period. We need sustainable long-term investments. That's the responsibility of the policymakers. So we do not go into cyclic where prices go beyond reasonable. We need to have that investment continuous.
John is itching to get in here, Moath, so we're going to let John in.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add to Moath, your list. I like your list. I mean, I would add green transition to your list of why mining is essential. We're not going to get to net zero by 2050, or even have the chance of it without transition minerals. We're going to need double the copper in the whole of human history in the next 20 years, as we heard this afternoon. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how we do mining. So that nobody here on this panel is anti-mining. I think it's really important. But we know that 54% of new mining around the world is going to be in indigenous adjacent lands or subsistence farming adjacent lands. It's not in my country. It's partly in some of your countries, but we know where a lot of these minerals are, right? They're all over the place, often in places where very poor, marginalized people live. So we can't just do it in any old way. And I think that's the problem is the lack of vertical and horizontal integration in my mind. We don't bring round the table, I think the traceability point is critical, because a lot of the incentives are going to come from the consumers, the built environment, the people that are using these new commodities. How do we get them aligned with you guys, the mining community, so they're rewarding you? So there's a price to be paid. You actually are rewarded for doing this in the right way. At the moment, just in my world of governance and standards, there are very few commodities where you have full vertical integration on these issues. So that would be a very tangible thing I think we could do.
Mark.
So,
Both Marks. You go first, then Mark number 2.
So from my point of view, mining needs people and people need mining. And this point about who's responsible, it's not about responsibility, because that's like the anti-mining NGO that arrives to tell us that people, they can't have mining and development, but they're carrying their cell phone and their very high quality earrings. And so, you know, for me, it's about, we don't consult people, we tell them they need to be indigenous. You know, that's where we come from as well. We needed to sell them the opportunity to develop, to advance, to uplift their standards and quality of life. We don't sell that. We don't sell mining. We don't embrace mining, but we exploit it. And so that is what we've got to do, is we've got to have a much more transparent conversation and global economy.
Music to your ears, I'm sure. Mark?
0.3% of the Earth's surface is dedicated to mining. The products of mining, through fertilizers, making the agricultural industry more productive, allowing us to build up and out, as Mark was pointing out, 30% reduction in our human footprint because of mining. We can't afford to sterilize major tracts of land that have minerals, whether it's traditional land or land that's already been developed. The world has to have access to all that land so we together can make the right decisions about what we develop. And we've got market forces and governments, and we need forums where we dialogue and share the issues and make the right decisions for the long term for most of the people or all of the people where we can. And it is about supporting mining, it's about dialoguing and understanding the trade-offs have to come both from a traditional perspective and what I'd call a modern constitutional perspective. No one's right or wrong. They are different and they need to be reconciled, and we need to come together and find out how we do this together, because that's the future for our kids.
A lot of comment on your earrings, I noticed in the course of this session.
I know.
And they are lovely, of course. But I just wonder whether is this persuading you that the readiness is there? Because one thing that struck me from Mark is a very honest readiness to say, we're not in the right place. So there's a reality as to how minerals can develop this world, but we're not in the right place. Exactly. I imagine you're quite pleased to hear that.
I'm definitely very pleased to hear that, and I wouldn't be a good partner if I didn't test your commitments to what your commitments are to your community. So I think that needs to be clear as well, and that speaks to the aspirational position that we took earlier. So certainly with some of the points that I made there in terms of the sustainable agreement making, I think we've certainly shared some good responses there. But some of the other things as well as we spoke about in terms of the talent shortage, I think that part for me was really interesting. I think we look on the panel here as well, and in terms of gender diversity, being the only woman on the panel, where does that lead us as well in terms of the conversations? I think in terms of what we traject out into where we're developing mining into, this is a key forum, yet there's only one woman on this panel of esteemed, amazing men.
And that's a really important point and a key question. I'm looking at the clock. I've got someone in my ear. We've got to wrap this up. Yeah. So I'm going to do that, Marcelo, so I'm going to have to stop it there. And you've got one more thought you might have. You're going to have to hold it. You're going to have to stop it there. I have time enough, though, to ask you once again, minerals-led development, from what you've heard, myth? Hands up. Has that one hand gone down? Reality? No, we have some hands there. Reality?
These are reality hands.
Oh, reality. Reality. Well, look, reality wins the debate. But look, thank you so much to all of our debaters. As I think several of you pointed out, you are all on the same page. Yeah. You're at different corners of the page, possibly from time to time. You're all on the same page. It's been a terrific debate. Thank you for sharing it. Ladies and gentlemen, to our debaters, thank you very much indeed.
Hello, Michael.
If you'd like to head backstage, you're very welcome. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to move these marvelous lecterns designed for presidential candidates, of course, as I take the last of these off. And I'm going to move over here because one of the most important elements, I think, in that is development in Africa. And while we touched on it there, we didn't dwell too much on it, and we didn't do so for a very good reason, because our next session is devoted to the impact that the mineral sector does have on Africa, the impact that Africa can and perhaps should have on the mineral sector. That is our next session, and I think we're ready to receive our panelists now, so I'd like to invite Eleni Giokos of CNN once again to join us on stage. Is Africa missing an opportunity to develop? Eleni. Oh, I beg your pardon. Not quite ready for that. That's my fault. We're bringing on one or two other elements, bringing on the tables as well. Mark at one point mentioned artisanal mining, and that is in itself probably enough for an entire panel. But the question was raised without being answered about what to do about those mines. And indeed, are they as black and white an issue as I think many people believe the media see them to be, and perhaps the mining sector sees in different ways. So perhaps one of the other areas in which we can discuss the options open to.